The ambush. The meridian belt stretched across the outer rim like a necklace of glittering settlements, each colony a pearl of human ambition in the vast darkness. Colony 7, nicknamed New Harbor by its residents, floated in a stable orbit around a mineral-rich asteroid cluster. It was home to 40,000 souls, most of them families who had traded Earth's crowded cities for the frontier's promise of space and opportunity. Captain Joanna Reeves stood at the front of the Starhopper's main cabin, watching her students file in with their usual mixture of excitement and barely contained chaos. She was 34, with short brown hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of managing both spacecraft and teenagers. The gray jacket of the Meridian Education Corps hung loose on her shoulders, its sleeve patch showing a book cradled by stars. 28 students filled the cabin, ages ranging from 12 to 16. They wore matching blue jumpsuits with reflective strips along the arms and legs, standard issue for educational excursions beyond colony walls. Each jumpsuit had a name patch and a small emergency beacon sewn into the collar. Marcus Webb dropped into a seat near the front, already pulling out his personal tablet before the safety announcement finished. At 14, he had the thin frame of someone who spent more time with code than with sports. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced ease, checking the Starhopper's public system displays, just because he could. Zara Okonkwo claimed the seat beside him, her dark eyes scanning the cabin with the natural awareness of someone who always knew where everyone stood. She was 15 and had captained 3 different school project teams of victory in regional competitions. People followed her, without quite knowing why. Chun Park sat 3 rows back, his notebook already open to a hand-drawn schematic of the Starhopper's layout. He was 13 but thought like a tactician, always mapping spaces, exits, and possibilities. His teachers called it attention to detail. His parents called it overthinking. Chun called it being prepared. Priya Sharma settled near the communication panel, her position seemingly casual but deliberately chosen. At 16, she was the oldest student on the trip and had already logged more volunteer hours at the colony's communication hub than some paid staff. She noticed a flickering status light on the panel and made a mental note to mention it to Captain Reeves later. The Starhopper was not a luxury vessel. It was a repurposed cargo shuttle with reinforced hull plating and expanded life support, converted specifically for education transport. Its windows were genuine transparency alloy rather than view screens, giving students an unfiltered look at the universe outside. The cabin smelled faintly of recycled air and the synthetic lemon scent of cleaning solution. Captain Reeves raised her hand, and the chatter dimmed. The students had learned that gesture meant attention, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it over countless field trips and emergency drills that never felt like drills. "Good morning, explorers," she said, her voice carrying easily through the cabin. "Today we're heading to the Frontier Memorial Station. It's a 4-hour flight to the Meridian Belt, past 3 mining operations, and along the edge of what we call the Quiet Zone." Several students leaned forward. The Quiet Zone was where colonial authority grew thin, and independent operators worked outside official oversight. It was not quite lawless, but it was certainly less predictable. We'll be observing frontier operations, learning about resource management, and paying respects to the pioneers who established our presence in this sector, Reeves continued. Along the way, we'll practice navigation plotting, communication protocols, and emergency response procedures. Marcus glanced up from his tablet. Emergency response procedures were always part of field trips, but Reeves had emphasized them more than usual. He filed that observation away. "Harnesses secure," Reeves called out. "We launch in 3 minutes." The students complied with practiced efficiency. This was not their first trip beyond the colony walls. Meridian Belt education philosophy emphasized direct experience over classroom theory. Students went outside, saw things firsthand, and learned by doing. It produced capable young people who understood their environment. The Starhopper's engines hummed to life, a low vibration that students felt through their seats. The vessel detached from New Harbor's docking ring with a gentle push, then rotated to face the open belt. Through the windows, the colony fell away, its habitation modules and solar arrays growing smaller against a backdrop of stars. The flight began smoothly. Reeves moved through the cabin, answering questions and pointing out landmarks. Marcus monitored the navigation display. Zara organized a quick betting pool on how many cargo haulers they would pass, and Chen sketched the asteroid formations they flew past. 2 hours into the journey, the Star Hopper entered the outer edge of the quiet zone. Traffic thinned. The MART navigation beacons grew farther apart. This was where independent miners worked claims that larger corporations considered too scattered or too dangerous. Priya noticed the communication panel's status light shift from green to amber. She frowned and leaned closer. The primary channel was still active, but the backup frequencies were showing interference. "Captain Reeves," she called out, keeping her voice level. "We're getting some signal degradation on the secondary bands." Reeves moved to the panel, her expression neutral but attentive. She checked the readings, then glanced at the main navigation display. They were still on course, still within expected parameters. Interference happened in the belt. Mineral deposits, solar flares, and old equipment created noise. Noted, Reeves said, "Keep monitoring it." What none of them could see was the Korthax Raider ship drifting in the shadow of a tumbling asteroid 3,000 kilometers ahead. Its hull was dark, its engines cold, and its sensors passively absorbing every detail of the approaching Star Hopper. Warlord Threx stood on the command deck of the Ravager's Tooth, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. He was Korthax, a species that resembled Earth's ancient reptiles scaled up and given intelligence, ambition, and a cultural obsession with martial prowess. Threx clan had fallen on hard times, losing territory and honor in a series of failed raids against well-defended targets. This school transport represented opportunity. It was lightly armed, carried minimal crew, and its passengers were leverage. Humans valued their young above almost everything else. A captured school vessel would bring ransom, concessions, and perhaps most importantly, a restoration of Threck's reputation. Target confirmed. His censor officer reported. The officer was young, barely past his proving trials, and eager to participate in a successful raid. Single vessel, low defensive rating, minimal escort signature. Threck's eyes narrowed. Minimal, not zero. What escort? Automated beacon linked to a patrol cutter, but it's 40 minutes away at best speed. Standard precaution for education transports. 40 minutes was more than enough time. Threck had planned this intercept carefully, studying human education routes for weeks. The Star Hopper followed a predictable schedule. Its path took it through this isolated section of the belt, where response times were slow and witnesses were scarce. "Prepare the grappler," Threck ordered. "Boarding teams to stations. Disable their engines, but do not breach life support. We want the cargo intact." The Ravager's Tooth came alive. Warriors moved to their positions, checking weapons and sealing armor. The ship's grappler arms extended, massive mechanical claws designed to lock onto hulls and prevent escape. On the Star Hopper, Marcus was the first to notice something wrong. A shadow crossed from the windows, too regular to be an asteroid. He looked up and saw the Ravager's Tooth dropping its stealth protocol, its hull suddenly visible as it accelerated toward them. "Captain," he said, his voice tight, "we have company." Reeves was at the navigation console in 3 steps. The proximity alarms began shrieking half a second later. On the display, the hostile vessel was already within weapons range. "All students, Protocol Sierra." Reeves snapped. Her voice carried absolute authority. "Now." The cabin transformed. Students who had been relaxed and chatting moments before moved with immediate purpose. They released their harnesses but stayed low. Zara began organizing rows into teams without being asked. Chun pulled up the emergency procedures on his tablet and started distributing assignments. Priya was already at the communication panel, fingers flying across the controls. Protocol Sierra was not theoretical. Every student in the Meridian Belt colonies trained for it from age 8. It assumed that rescue would not arrive instantly and that children needed to be active participants in their own survival. It was controversial among other human colonies, but in the frontier, it was practical necessity. The Star Hopper shuddered as the Korthax grappler locked onto its hull. Metal screamed against metal. The lights flickered, then stabilized on emergency power. Distress signal sent, Priya reported. Automated beacon is active. Patrol response estimated at 38 minutes. 38 minutes might as well have been 38 hours if the pirates moved quickly. Reeves knew this. The students knew this. Marcus, can you lock down internal access panels? Reeves asked. Marcus was already working on it. His fingers danced across his tablet, accessing the Star Hopper security systems through the student maintenance interface. He had quietly figured out how to exploit 3 field trips ago. Locking secondary hatches. Main boarding hatches reinforced, but they'll cut through it. How long? 3 minutes, maybe 4. Zara had divided the students into 4 groups, each with a designated leader and a specific section of the cabin to prepare. They moved with nervous energy, but not panic. This was training becoming reality, and while fear was present, it was channeled into action. Chin stood near Captain Reeves, his notebook now showing a quick sketch of the cabin with marked positions. If they breach at the main hatch, they'll expect us to be clustered at the far end. We should split the groups to the side compartments. Reeves nodded. Do it. The students filed into the smaller compartments that normally held equipment and supplies. They left the main cabin looking occupied but not crowded. Through the windows, they could see armored figures moving along the Ravager's 2's hull, approaching with cutting equipment. The first cut began with a bright orange glow as plasma torches bit into the Star Hopper's hatch. Sparks drifted in the zero gravity outside, then were sucked away by the void. Inside the cabin, the students watched in silence. Several gripped the emergency toolkits they had pulled from the wall compartments. Others held tablets displaying ship systems or communication channels. Captain Reeves stood in the center of the cabin, alone and visible. She had positioned herself deliberately, drawing attention while her students prepared. She activated the external speaker system. Unidentified vessel. You are committing an act of piracy against a registered education transport. Colonial law requires you to disengage immediately. The response came through the same speaker, translated from Korthax by the Star Hopper's communication system. The voice was deep and carried the hissing accent of the Korthax language. Human vessel, you will comply with boarding procedures. Resistance will result in harm to your passengers. We seek only negotiation and compensation. Threk's words were carefully chosen. Negotiation sounded more civilized than ransom. Compensation implied legitimate grievance rather than opportunistic theft. These were the verbal games pirates played to maintain some pretense of honor. Reeves did not respond. She simply waited, her hands visible and empty, her expression calm. The hatch collapsed inward with a metallic crash. Emergency seals activated, containing the atmosphere and preventing decompression. Through the smoking opening came 6 Korthax warriors in powered armor, their weapons raised and their helmet sensors sweeping the cabin. They stopped when they saw only the single human adult standing in the center of the open space. The lead warrior, marked by red striping on his armor, gestured with his weapon. Where the others? Secured in safety compartments, Reeves replied evenly, as per emergency protocol. The warrior's helmet tilted slightly. He had expected crying, panic, and chaos. Human young were supposed to be fragile and emotional. Instead, he found an organized response in a calm teacher. Bring them out, the warrior ordered. No, Reeves said simply. The warrior stepped forward, raising his weapon to an explicitly threatening position. You will comply, or we will extract them ourselves. From the side compartment, Marcus watched through a crack in the door. His tablet was still connected to the ship's systems. Beside him, Zara had her hand on his shoulder, ready to signal the others. Chin was positioned at another door, counting the number of pirates and noting their equipment. Priya maintained an open but muted channel to the Colonial Patrol, broadcasting everything. Captain Reeves stood her ground, and in that moment, the students understood what Protocol Sierra truly meant. It was not about cowering and waiting for rescue. It was about becoming harder to predict, harder to control, and harder to break than anyone expected. The Korthax had boarded a school bus. They had no idea what a human field trip actually prepared children to handle. Threk's voice crackled through the lead warrior's helmet. Secure the vessel. All occupants to the main cabin. Use force if necessary, but avoid lethal harm. They are worth more alive. The warriors began moving toward the compartment doors. And in those compartments, 28 students stopped being victims and started being something the pirates had never encountered before. Human children who had been taught that survival was a skill, not a hope. The counterstrike. The Korthax warriors moved with the confidence of predators who had cornered prey. They approached the compartment doors with weapons raised, expecting to find terrified children huddled in the dark. What they found instead was empty space and the soft hiss of ventilation systems. The lead warrior, whose name was Skrull, activated his helmet comm. Compartments are empty. The juveniles are not here. On the Ravager's tooth, Warlord Threk felt the first stirring of unease. His scaled fingers tightened on the armrest of his command chair. Scan for life signs. They cannot hide on a vessel that small. The sensor officer complied, running a thermal sweep of the Star Hopper. 29 heat signatures appeared on the display, scattered throughout the ship in positions that made no tactical sense. Some were in the cargo hold, others in the engineering crawl space, several in the cockpit section, and one moving through the ventilation system. They have dispersed throughout the vessel, the sensor officer reported. Patterns suggest deliberate distribution rather than panic. Threk stood, his full height casting a shadow across the command deck. This was wrong. Human children were supposed to cluster together, seeking comfort from each other and their guardian. They were not supposed to spread out like trained soldiers establishing defensive positions. Boarding team, secure all juveniles immediately, Threk ordered. Do not let them access ship systems. The warning came too late. In the Star Hopper's maintenance crawl space, Marcus had his tablet connected directly to the ship's secondary computer core. The system was technically locked to students, but Marcus had spent 6 months learning its architecture during previous field trips. He had never planned to use his knowledge for anything more serious than changing the cabin temperature without asking permission. Now he was rewriting access permissions and redirecting system controls. His hand shook slightly, but his fingers remained steady on the screen. Beside him, 2 other students held emergency lights, illuminating the cramped space. I can lock the internal bulkheads, Marcus whispered. Make them work for every meter. Do it, came Zara's voice through his comm earpiece. She was 3 sections away, coordinating movements through the student emergency network. Every child in the Meridian colonies carried a short-range personal comm as standard safety equipment. Now those comms formed an invisible web of communication that the pirates had not detected. Marcus executed the command. Throughout the Star Hopper, bulkhead doors slid closed and locked with magnetic seals. The Korthax warriors found themselves suddenly separated, each group isolated in different sections of the ship. Skrull hammered his armored fist against the door that had sealed in front of him. We are contained. Override these locks. His technical specialist moved forward, attaching a portable breaker to the door's control panel. The device hummed and sparked, but the door remained sealed. The specialist's helmet tilted in confusion. The security protocols are scrambled. Someone has changed the access codes. In the cargo hold, Zara knelt beside 4 other students, all of them listening to the muffled sounds of warriors trying to breach doors above them. She had her own tablet open, displaying a map of the ship that Chun had uploaded to the student network. Chun, what are we looking at? She asked quietly. Chen's voice came through the comm, calm and analytical. 6 warriors inside the ship, separated into 3 groups of 2. Another 4 on the Ravager's tooth monitoring the grappler connection. Threk is on his command deck, with approximately 8 crew members. Weapons. The boarding team carries energy rifles, non-lethal setting based on the discharge I saw earlier. They want us alive. That is our advantage. Zara absorbed this information. Non-lethal meant the pirates were constrained by their own objectives. They needed hostages, not casualties. That gave the students room to maneuver. Priya, status on the patrol response? Zara asked. From the cockpit section, Priya's voice responded immediately. She had positioned herself at the communication station, maintaining an open channel to Colonial Command despite the pirates' jamming attempts. Patrol Cutter has cut response time to 22 minutes. They have dispatched a fast response unit. Admiral Castellanos is personally overseeing the operation. 22 minutes. It felt like an eternity and an instant simultaneously. Captain Reeves remained in the main cabin, now under guard by 2 Korthax warriors. She sat calmly in one of the student seats, her hands folded in her lap. One warrior stood near the breech hatch while the other paced, clearly agitated by the unexpected complications. "Your juveniles are delaying the inevitable," the pacing warrior said. His translator gave his voice a mechanical edge. "We will breach the doors and collect them. They only make this harder for themselves." Reeves smiled slightly. "You have never dealt with Meridian students before, have you?" The warrior stopped pacing. "What difference does their origin make? Young humans are weak and fearful. This is known." "No," Reeves said quietly. "That is assumed. There is a difference." In the engineering crawlspace, Marcus had moved beyond simply locking doors. He was now exploring the interface between the Star Hopper systems and the Ravager's 2-Scrapper connection. The 2 ships were physically joined, but they also shared a data connection for coordinating docking procedures. Marcus stared at that connection with growing excitement. The Korthax had not secured it properly, assuming the civilian education transport had no one aboard who could exploit technical vulnerabilities. "I can see their grapple control system," Marcus whispered into his comm. "It is not even encrypted. I think I can trigger an emergency release." Zar's response was immediate. "No, if we separate now, they will just re-engage. We need them committed to being inside our ship when help arrives." Marcus understood. The goal was not escape. It was containment. Keep the pirates engaged and confused until superior force arrived. "Understood," Marcus said, "but I am mapping their systems. If we need an exit option, I can create one." "Ms. Sharma, tell your classmates they are doing excellent work. Hold your positions. Help is coming." The connection ended. Priya allowed herself a brief smile before returning her attention to the sensor displays. On the Ravager's tooth, Threk was reaching a decision point. His boarding operation had failed to secure hostages quickly. His grappler was under stress. And now his sensor officer was reporting increased signal strength from a human vessel. "They have penetrated our jamming," the sensor officer reported. "Colonial forces are aware of our position." Threk's fist clenched. This was supposed to be a simple raid, a quick seizure, a fast ransom, and a restoration of his clan's honor. Instead, he was being humiliated by human juveniles who refused to behave like victims. He made his choice, released the grappler, prepared to disengage. Captain Reeves, still standing before him under guard, spoke quietly. "If you leave now, you leave with nothing. No hostages, no ransom, and a very public failure that will be reported across the sector. But if you surrender peacefully, you can claim you withdrew when you realize your targets were children. There is more honor in that than in fleeing." Threk turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the command deck was silent except for the hum of systems and the distant alarm indicating colonial ships approaching. Then something unexpected happened. A young Korthax warrior stepped forward from his position near the wall. He was smaller than the others, his armor less decorated, and his movements carried a hesitation that spoke of inexperience. "Warlord Threk," the young warrior said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I request permission to speak." Threk's eyes narrowed dangerously. Interruptions during command decisions were grounds for severe punishment. But something in the young warrior's tone made him pause. "Speak, Yixel." "I was positioned near one of the sealed compartments on the human vessel. I heard the juveniles communicating. They spoke with fear, yes, but also with purpose. They coordinated, they planned, and they executed strategies. They did this not because they are warriors, but because their elders taught them to be capable." Yixel paused, gathering courage. "Our clan has fallen because we raid and take. We do not build or teach. We do not prepare our young to think, only to fight. Perhaps this is why we fail." The command deck fell into shocked silence. Challenging clan philosophy in front of the warlord was tantamount to challenging the warlord himself. But Threk did not strike Yixel down. Instead, he looked at Captain Reeves with something that might have been respect. Your juveniles have taught an unexpected lesson today, Threx said slowly, though not the one you intended. He turned to his crew. Disengage all systems. We withdraw. The Ravager's tooth released its grappler lock. The Star Hopper drifted free, its hull scarred but intact. Through the windows, the students watched the pirate vessel begin to maneuver away. They are leaving, Marcus reported, his voice filled with disbelief. Colonial Fast Response Unit just entered sensor range, Priya added. 3 patrol cutters, full military configuration. The timing was perfect. The Korthax had disengaged just as overwhelming force arrived, allowing them to retreat with some dignity, intact rather than being forcibly repelled. Captain Reeves was escorted back to the Star Hopper before the final separation. As she crossed the grappler bridge, Yixel stood near the airlock, watching her departure. Your juveniles, he said quietly. They are remarkable. Reeves paused. They are normal children who have been given the tools to be capable. Any young person can become remarkable if you teach them properly. When the hatch sealed and the Star Hopper was finally free, the students emerged from their positions. They gathered in the main cabin, exhausted, shaking with adrenaline but unharmed. Marcus collapsed into a seat, his tablet still clutched in his hands. Zara did a quick head count, confirming all 28 students were accounted for. Chin carefully filed his notebook, already mentally composing the after-action report. Priya maintained her communication link with Colonial Command, providing updates until patrol cutters formed protective escort around the Star Hopper. Captain Reeves stood at the front of the cabin once more, looking at her students with eyes that held both pride and profound relief. Well done, she said simply. All of you. The students erupted into a mixture of nervous laughter, excited chatter, and a few tears that had been held back during crisis. They had survived their first real test of Protocol Sierra, and while none of them wanted to repeat the experience, they all understood what they had proven. Human children were not helpless. They were not weak. They were prepared, capable, and far more dangerous than anyone expected when given the right training and the will to survive. 3 hours later, the Star Hopper limped into dock at the Frontier Memorial Station, escorted by Colonial Patrol and surrounded by media drones. The students disembarked to find Admiral Castellanos waiting personally to greet them. News of the incident had spread across the sector with remarkable speed. The story was not about children being rescued. It was about children who had held their ground, outsmarted their captors, and turned a hijacking into a humiliation for the pirates who had underestimated them. Interviews followed, official reports were filed, and the Meridian Education Corps suddenly found itself fielding inquiries from colonies across human space. Everyone wanted to know about Protocol Sierra. Everyone wanted to understand how these children had been trained. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Alien observers began requesting permission to study human educational methods. The Korthax clan, facing widespread mockery for their failed raid, quietly began implementing training programs for their young to emphasize problem-solving alongside combat skills. And on 1,000 human colonies, children who had previously seen emergency drills as boring requirements now understood why their teachers insisted on preparation. The students of the Star Hopper had demonstrated a fundamental truth that resonated across human space. The frontier was dangerous. Threats were real. But humans did not raise their children to be victims. They raised them to be survivors, thinkers, and citizens who could face the universe with confidence. Marcus returned to his normal routine of coding and system exploration, but now colony security occasionally consulted him on vulnerabilities. Zara was offered early admission to the Colonial Leadership Academy. Chen's tactical analyses became study materials in emergency response courses. Priya joined the Colonial Communications Corps as an apprentice. Captain Joanna Reeves continued teaching, leading field trips into the Meridian Belt with the same steady competence she had always shown. But now, when she stood before new students and explained Protocol Sierra, they listened with different attention. Because somewhere in a quiet zone, pirates had tried to hijack a human school bus. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had encountered something terrifying and uniquely human. Children who had been taught that a field trip was not just about learning from observation. It was about learning to survive anything the universe threw at you. Together, the Star Hopper was repaired, its hull patched and its systems upgraded. The maintenance crew added a small plaque near the main hatch, officially unofficial, but tolerated by administrators who understood its significance. It read, "Field Trip 127, no students lost." That plaque became a tradition. Every education transport in the Meridian Belt eventually carried one, a quiet reminder that human children went into Frontier not as protected cargo, but as prepared participants in their own future. And in the darkness beyond colonial borders, pirates learned to check their target manifests more carefully, because there were easier prey than a human school bus on a field trip. Much, much easier prey.